Hey everyone, welcome to the Cybercrime YouTube channel. In this video I'm going to discuss a really interesting current event in the US right now. So starting a couple of days ago, the US had a run on gasoline and shortages on gasoline in the southwest US affecting several states. And then yesterday the US gas price, the average gas price, hit a high that hadn't been reached in 7 years. So as you can already connect the dots, this was caused by a hack. So I'm going to discuss this hack, give you my analysis, and also tell you what you can do to prevent this from happening to you. So my background, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at a well-known university in the United States. I have a BS in Computer Science, an MBA, and hold 3 current certifications, the CISSP, the GCED, and the GSEC. So as I mentioned yesterday, the average gas price in the US hit $3 a gallon, the highest level since 2014. Drivers in the southeast U.S. made a run on gas, and which in turn caused shortages. What's interesting too is the shortages not only affected gasoline but also affected jet fuel, so airlines have been affected. The cause of this was a shutdown to the Colonial Pipeline, which transports about 45% of gasoline and natural gas on the East Coast. And this was caused by a ransomware infection. The Colonial Pipeline operators indicate their operational network wasn't affected, but their information network was. So just some background, oftentimes when you have what are called industrial control systems, like say a water treatment plant or an electricity company, or in this case a gas provider, you often have networks that are separate for both the operational pieces and then the information systems. So think of the information systems like email servers or file systems. So those are often kept separate from, for instance, the pipeline network or from the electricity generators. So the timeline here is fascinating. I'm going to start on Friday of what all's occurred. A lot's happened in the past few days, but on Friday, May 7th, the Colonial Pipeline, the leading fuel conduit to the East Coast, temporarily halted operations. The next day, the Wall Street Journal indicated that a cyberattack forced its closure. On Sunday, the main pipeline was offline, but Colonial said that some of the lateral lines were still in service. So the lateral lines are basically the small pipelines that come off, that feed off the main pipeline, and that go to more distributed areas within the given geographical area. Also on Sunday, May 9th, the federal government issued an emergency declaration. On Monday, the Colonial Pipeline operators indicated that restoring service could take until the end of the week. And then on Monday also, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, attributed the attack to an Eastern European crime gang known as DarkSide. I'll talk more about DarkSide here in a little bit. It's a really interesting crime gang. On Tuesday, we started seeing some gas stations running out of gas and huge lines at gas stations. And then also on Tuesday, the CISA and FBI issued a joint advisory on the DarkSide ransomware. On Wednesday, as I mentioned, the U.S. hit their highest gas price average since 2014. And then also late on Wednesday, May 12th, the Colonial Pipeline restarted operations. So what caused this? As I mentioned, on Saturday, Colonial Pipeline cited a ransomware infection. And then also the same day, they indicated that only their information systems network was affected, but not their operational control network. One thing they did that was great is they brought in a company named FireEye. They brought in specifically FireEye's Mandiant group to do incident response. Now, if you have the money, Mandiant is the group to go with. If you have a huge issue, a huge hack, you want to go with Mandiant. They're one of the best, if not the best, in cybersecurity right now. So Colonial did a great thing by bringing them in. And as I mentioned, on Monday, May 10th, DarkSide was identified as a culprit. And they're a relatively new hacking group. The analysis I read says that they started operations basically in August of 2020 and have targeted about 40-something known victims. And they extort anywhere from the hundreds of thousands to the millions of dollars from these groups, from these organizations. And this is a bit different from your typical ransomware operator because oftentimes ransomware operators will target smaller businesses, people who don't have as much money, but DarkSide focuses on businesses that have a lot of money. That way they can extort that much more. What's interesting is on Monday, May 10th, DarkSide on their website indicated that their only goal is to get money and denies any political connection. This is really interesting because if you think about it, many of these crime gangs are contracted out or parts of nation states. So the recent SolarWinds attack, for instance, that was definitely connected to a Russian state-sponsored cybercrime gang. As for the DarkSide ransomware, DarkSide is a ransomware as a service model, if you will. The idea is that the ransomware author allows other criminals to contract out that ransomware to then use to infect given companies and organizations. What's interesting about this business model is that the ransomware authors will take a cut, I believe 25 to 30% of the extorted money in exchange for the use of the ransomware. The ransomware is often used to gain access to victims' networks, to encrypt data, and then to exfiltrate data, i.e. steal the data. One really interesting trend, and DarkSide does this too, but one interesting trend that's happened over the past few years is that ransomware operators no longer just depend on encrypting data and basically holding a given business's operations still. They try to extort businesses further by leveraging the victim's data and putting pressure on them to basically say, hey, if you don't pay up, I'm going to post your data online and make it public. So if you have any sensitive emails or shareholder data there, personal information about people in the company or your investors, that can become very persuasive really quickly. What's interesting about this cyber attack is that there's just been a buildup over the years of ransomware infection. So any company that's got significant revenue really needs to consider the threat of ransomware. So just some significant points here. I'll start with this Wall Street Journal quote, but many machines that control pipelines, refineries, and power plants are well past their prime, have few protections against sophisticated attacks, and could be manipulated amok with equipment or cause damage, cybersecurity experts say. In general, what the Wall Street Journal is saying is that many of the industrial control systems that we've got in the US, and I imagine around the world, are running on older deprecated software and that are very vulnerable to attack. The city of Atlanta in 2018 spent $2.6 million to recover from a ransomware infection, where the ransomware operators only won $52,000 for the ransom. So doing the math, well, I won't do the math right now, but the city of Atlanta spent a lot more to recover rather than pay the criminals their ransom. And I certainly understand on principle why they want to incentivize these criminals with the money. I certainly understand that. But I'm just sharing this point basically to say you can spend a lot of money trying to recover from a ransomware infection. The shipping company Maersk in 2020 had a really brutal cybersecurity infection. They spent anywhere between $200 million to $300 million to recover. And I wrote the word luck here basically because they did get lucky. So the ransomware that infected the company infected their entire network and all their backups too. So even if they wanted to restore from their data backups, they could not. Where they got lucky is they had a data center in Lagos, Nigeria that they were in the process of decommissioning, but they hadn't quite gotten to fully decommissioning yet. So they had some data there still backed up. So they're able to bring their company back from that random data center in Lagos. So that, yeah, they got incredibly lucky. So what can you do to prevent a ransomware infection? And what can you do to recover if you do get infected? So in this list, I'm providing some defense in depth methods, starting with what's least complex to more complex. So if you're trying to protect something at home or a small business, you'll probably want to start with the first few bullet points and then work your way down. The more complex and the more money you make. In general, updating your software frequently is something you really, really want to do. Software gets security bugs in it, security holes in it over time. So for your home computers, for sure, definitely schedule them to install updates and update automatically. For the applications, i.e. your internet browsers or applications on your phone, check for updates on those frequently. You want to keep those patched and keep the security holes plugged. You'll want to run anti-malware software on your computers and devices as much as possible and keep that updated. Ideally, if your computer gets ransomware on it, this will pick it up and detect it and stop it before it has a chance to encrypt your data. For businesses out there, make sure you have employee training. This is most important in my opinion when it comes to email and email security and phishing. So one of the vectors that the DarkSide group likes to infect people with is through phishing emails. So for instance, they may send somebody an email basically saying, hey, click this link. Then when you click on it, they'll often either infect you or then steal your username and password. And so it's important to train your employees to basically know, hey, don't click suspicious links, and certainly don't give your personal information over email or over a link you followed. Something else you can do that's great is implementing multi-factor authentication. So anywhere you use a significant service like Gmail or banking or investing, they're going to have multi-factor authentication available, so make sure you enable that. What this does for you is it means that no longer are you a stolen password away from a criminal logging into your email or investment account. They now have to have your password and something you control, like your phone, to be able to log in. For any, I would say like a medium-sized business on up, consider something called vulnerability management. And this is certainly a concept that's a little bit more complex and heavy duty, but you could certainly outsource this to an IT service provider. But the general idea is you want to evaluate your network and understand where your weak points are. So in this case, I highlight end-of-life software and systems because with the Colonial Pipeline operators, there's some talk that basically says that they are running software systems that are end-of-life, which means they're going to be that much easier to hack because they're going to be just rife with security holes. So check out your network, see what the weak points are. And again, if you can't do this, you don't know how to look up the versions for your operating system or your software, you can certainly pay somebody to do this and help you identify what the weak points are so you can shore up those holes. If you have a significant network of any size, definitely implement network segmentation. For industrial networks, you'll definitely want to segment the networks, the operational networks, i.e. where your industrial control systems are, from your IT networks. And if you only have an IT network, definitely segment your more important servers from systems and computers where your employees are operating on a day-to-day basis. That way, if the employee computers get infected, it's so much harder to infect the more important systems. Practice incident response. Effectively, what this means is create a playbook or walk through scenarios of what could happen if your business or your home is infected with ransomware. Maybe in this process you discover, hey, I've got all my backups here on my one laptop. So what can I do if I get infected? Well, what could really help you is if you have an external hard drive that you keep unplugged or you back up your data to the cloud. So this could basically, practicing incident response can help you identify, again, more weak points and figure out, okay, if I do get infected, how can I restore from backup or who can I call? Consider entry points where the dark side gang got into networks. So again, they were known to use phishing. So train your employees, train yourself on what to do with phishing emails and how to handle them and, on the best practices. Consider on your network, if you do allow remote access, consider whether you're using MFA there, if you're using weak passwords, or if you really even need remote access, because that's oftentimes how these criminals can get into your network. And then the dark side gang is also known to use what's called virtual desktop infrastructure. This is probably only going to be in place in businesses that are more significant size, but if you do use VDI, consider what you're doing to secure those devices, those endpoints. And again, one thing you can really do, and I highly recommend, if your business generates revenue of any significance that you depend on, perform risk management, and especially a cost-benefit analysis. So all these cybersecurity techniques that I'm speaking of, or techniques, tools, and practices, take time and energy and money. Identify how much money you're making right now and what it would cost you if you got infected by ransomware. Then identify what it would cost you to bring in somebody who's got an IT background or security background to help you. Just make those calls right now, those calculations right now, and those choices right now, because it's a lot easier and a lot better for you to make these choices and calculations right now than whenever you're under the gun and you have a ransomware infection on your network. Finally, the last piece I highly recommend is making sure you have backups and make sure you restore from these backups. So periodically, if you have backups scheduled, make sure you're restoring data from there. Copy a file from your backups back to your computer and make sure that these backups work. I've certainly seen scenarios where organizations think they have backups and then realize the backups don't work. And then finally, make sure your backups are isolated. That way, if your computer gets infected, you don't want the backups on the computer itself. You want the backups separate. That way, you can power off the computer, get a brand new one, restore from backup. And this is the last piece I want to share, but basically it's a link to a joint advisory from CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and the FBI. But this is a really thorough article about dark side, but then also what you can do to prevent from getting infected and how to recover from it. I highly recommend you check this out. Of all the links I'm going to include below, make sure you check this one out. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.